Well, how do you follow Hans Rosling? I've watched that on the internet a number of times, and I've always thought of it as the best, the best. So I can only apologize now. I've decided not to use PowerPoint slides. I think you'll probably have a surfeit of them today, so I think I would just like to talk to you, but I do have some facts I want to get right, so apologies if I refer to paper every now and again. So I'd like to start with a personal story. As Chris said, I used to work for CARE. I was its chief executive, and an early part of my role there, I went to visit a project we were funding in Bolivia, my first visit to Bolivia, a very beautiful country, and my first visit actually to the project we were working with farmers on the edge of a national park. And to my surprise slightly, I was taken not to the national park to start with, I was taken to the local hospital where I was shown a row of farmers in bed with bullets in them. And when I asked what this was this part of our scheme, they said, no, this is the park guards who shot the farmers. So I went to the park to say, look, something probably not working very well. And as I walked in, I noticed that the park guards were being paid by WWF. And I thought, this is interesting. Something really isn't working here. And when I got back to the UK, I said, well, hang on a second. Let's think about that. And of course, it very quickly appeared to me that those people working in environment and conservation were over here, completely parallel careers, paid by different people doing different things. And over here were those of us involved in social development. And it would seem to be the only time we crossed paths was when we shot each other, which was clearly a mistake. So agreed that we would talk as CARE to WWF and look at the implications of our program and their program. And when there was an overlap of interest, so if there was anything that affected the environment, we would talk to them. And if there's anything that affected people in the economy, they'd talk to us. And surprise, surprise, it was basically everything we did. So we agreed to have that conversation, and for me, and I'm a very slow learner, the penny dropped that this was actually the same issue. We were not talking about separate issues, but we were treating it as a very distinct issue. And as I learned about that, I was told, well, look, if you want to see panic, we'll look into the eyes of a climate scientist. And over the years, I've realized that actually I can now see panic in the eyes of social scientists and political scientists and businesses, and even economists, a recognition that all is not well. In fact, all is really not well. By the way, this is a depressing 18 minutes of your time. So a few facts, which I think they appear random, but I think they are interesting. They are the context. In London, it was announced last week that Veolia, the waste management company, is now starting to recover palladium, platinum, and rhodium from the dust of London streets as they sweep it up, because it's commercially viable to recover it from the dust. Scarcity. If we were to be so foolish as to melt all the ice at the poles, that is, and glaciers, that is 70 meters of sea level rise. Whatever else the consequences of that might be, that's very inconvenient. Half of all the carbon put into the atmosphere by mankind has been put there since 1973. And large chunks of that will still be having a warming impact in 30,000 years' time. In developed countries, between 30 and 80% of all adults are now clinically obese. The next 2.5 billion people expected on this planet will all live in cities in developing countries. Cities are growing around the world at about 200,000 people every day, and these are not leafy suburbs. These are not good places to bring up our children. 2 degrees of warming, which is more likely than not, I regret to say, will basically end the coffee industry in Uganda, the tea industry in Kenya, the cocoa industry in Ghana. That's what those economies rely on, and behind that, that's people whose lives depend upon it. There's more gold in a ton of blackberries than in a ton of gold ore, so, Chris, there is a value to blackberries. If you were born in the United States any time since the year 2000, you have a 1 in 3 chance of becoming diabetic. If your parents are Hispanic, that's a 1 in 2 chance. When the earthquake and tidal wave rocked Japan recently, they stopped being able to make cars in the United Kingdom within a month. Long supply chains, easily disrupted, people rethinking that. And for those of you who travel the world and every now and again walk up or down into a plane at Heathrow, you will have seen the HSBC facts along the walkways. 2/3 of all the people who've ever been 65 years old are alive today. So we live in the most extraordinary times, and we know more about it than we have done in the past. I could make a much longer list. It's very depressing. It's often very disempowering to have a list that long. But that list is not just the kind of preserve of depressed pessimists. Actually, the more people I talk to, the more people are beginning to recognize it. It doesn't matter whether you're in the military or a government or a business or an NGO. We kind of know the facts now, And every time I go back and revise my kind of rather depressing presentation on these things, the lines tend to be going in the wrong direction increasingly rather than the right direction. And at the heart of all of those issues is a consumption-driven model of economic growth that basically is not adequately pricing the things that matter. We've been incentivizing the wrong kinds of behavior. So at its heart, we've got a very basic supply and demand problem. We've got one planet, only, as has been indicated, we behave as if we don't. And that's the fundamental problem. There's a view still widely held, I think, by economists, and I don't want you to give the impression this is a sort of anti-economist talk. It may come across occasionally as that. But there is still a widely held view that the economics will sort this out. It will price scarcity, it will drive innovation, it will solve the problem. And we should all just shut up about it. That actually we're thoughtful, engaged, technically competent species and we'll sort it out. I'm really not convinced. My favorite word in any language is wabenzi. For the Swahili speakers in the room, you know what wabenzi is. Wa means the people or tribe of, and Benzi is the Mercedes-Benz, the tribe of Mercedes-Benz drivers. If you ask a small child in a Nairobi slum what he or she wants to be when they grow up, they kind of say, well, I'd like to join the Wabens. I'd like to try and join that tribe, because it looks like they're having a better time than I am. And they're probably right. The question for us all is, can we possibly support a Wabenzi, a Mercedes-Benz driving lifestyle for 9 billion people? And if we can't, who's going to tell that child that actually that's not the rule, it's fine for my kid, but you don't get to become a Wabenz? Is that an easy conversation? Please don't ask me to have it. As Chris mentioned, until recently I chaired the UK Sustainable Development Commission. Our job was to advise government and to think the unthinkable. We were independent of government, but close enough to it to have quiet conversations. And our economics commissioner, a man called Tim Jackson, very good economist, produced a book called Prosperity Without Growth, ? And the question mark was put there at the insistence of the UK Treasury, who couldn't really contemplate the thought of even a semi-official report proposing that we could do prosperity without growth. We do growth, that's what we do, that's what economics does, that's what politicians do, that's what businesses do. But Tim asks some really hard questions. Actually, as an aside, there's an even more recent book called The Plundered Planet, which I would commend, by Paul Collier. And in it he writes, "It will come as no surprise to most people that economics students tend to be more self-interested than others. Either economics attracts the selfish, or worse, it inculcates greed." I thought that was an interesting one. Anyway, back to Tim's report. Excellent book. Unsurprisingly, it questions whether we can do infinite growth on a finite planet. It's a pretty simple answer to that one, I think. It acknowledges and recognizes that as human beings, we love novelty. I love the green one. Next week, I'll buy the purple one, and then I'll get the blue one. We love novelty, deeply ingrained. We have got to allow enough room for billions of people to enjoy a higher quality of life. There's an equity issue at the heart of this conundrum. And at the end, it identifies the need for a new economy. We need to do things differently. But probably the most challenging bit of that book, I think, is a single graph that says that in 2007, it took $768 to deliver 768 grams of carbon to deliver $1 of GDP. That's what it cost. If we are to have, which we will, 9 billion people on the planet, and if we are to encourage a greater degree of equity globally, and if we are to grow as an economy, because that's all we know how to do, we have to reduce that, if we're going to meet the science of climate change, we have to reduce that 768 grams per dollar down to 6. That's a 130-fold reduction in the intensity of our economies. Even the most efficient economy on the planet in 2007 was the Japanese economy, and that was running at about 240 grams per dollar. So even to get Japan down to where we need to be, so what's going to give? Is it going to be equity? Is it going to be growth? Is it going to be the environment? Something will have to give, because that equation doesn't work otherwise. Politicians worry about this, they know about it, and they worry about it for lots of reasons. The first is because these are long-term issues and they haven't got a long-term mechanism really to get to grips with it. But they worry about it also because there isn't anywhere a clear articulation of what a better world will be. There's an assumption that a sustainable one-planet world is a ghastly place. Oh my God, I've got to knit my own socks and eat lentils and live in a cave, and awful. And I haven't met a politician yet that stands up and says, I will lead you to this worse place. I will shrink this company. I haven't seen that. It doesn't work very well for politicians. And they also worry that they're the ones who are going to have to say, get off that plane, get out of your car, stop eating red meat, that the whole agenda is a negative agenda. It needn't be, but that's definitely the way it's positioned at the moment, I think. In the UK, between 1970 and 2000, our GDP was on a steeply rising graph. We were doing very nicely. We were riding a nice growing economy. Some of you remember, in your countries as well, at that moment. But at the same time, that same 30 years in the UK, happiness or well-being was completely flat. We were just as wretched at the end of 30 years of growth that we were at the beginning. So remind me what that growth thing is about? Better kind of quality of misery? Is that what we're chasing? Is that really the answer? So I apologize. This all sounds a bit like a counsel of despair. I am an optimist. As Chris said, you've kind of got to be. I know I don't sound like one today. And I'm genuinely heartened by the number of people, and they are slightly lone voices, but from right across the spectrum, who are waking up to the fact that the current model is broken. They may be successful within it, but they recognize that that is inadequate. They would like to be successful in a sustainable economy, not in an unsustainable economy. And that's where we are. The average lifespan of a North American chief executive is about 15 months before they're sacked because their share price often hasn't delivered. Is that really going to encourage long-term thinking? No way. That encourages a golden handshake, frantic activity to deliver a share price, and then a golden parachute, please, and on to do the same thing at the next business. The rules of the game really don't work very well. So it was heartening to hear Paul Polman at Unilever recently say, we're not going to give you quarterly results to the city. All you do is buy and sell our shares, add to volatility. That's not long-term value. If you want, we'll give you 6 months numbers, and we will, of course, produce an annual report. And if you don't like that, we don't want you as a shareholder. Woo, that's a brave thing to say. I have to say, it's the exception to the rule, but there are genuine gleams in the darkness of people who are starting to question the rules of the game and do something about it. In the 1970s, a book was produced called Limits to Growth. Some of you may have read it. It was widely derided at the time, mostly by the economics profession who said, rubbish, you're a load of gloomy, pessimistic Malthusians. We'll sort this out. We'll be innovative. Economics will price things. We'll get the things sorted out. But I have yet to see political policies, despite some of them starting to emerge, and corporate plans, despite some genuinely noble exceptions, that are grasping the nettle to the extent that we need to do it. When the authors of Limits to Growth went back to revise their findings recently, they discovered that, I suppose unhappily, they think they're right, that actually we will overshoot the carrying capacity of the planet to such a degree because of the momentum and the investment in the current system, and that will be a shame all round. So what's needed? A coherent, I would argue, a coherent, aspirational vision of a sustainable world. And it's got to work for those children in the slum of Nairobi as much as it works for my children in southeast England. If we can't do that, we're not going to find the space in politics or in business to get there. What is it? What is that better world? We need a recognition that business as usual is not going to get us there. We need profound change. We need a recognition that that's going to require genuine leadership. Overused word. We have politicians, we're going to need statesmen and stateswomen to get us there. Really inspirational leadership from the top. A recognition that it's not just the quantity of growth, it's the quality of growth that will matter over the years ahead. Fundamentally important. And to support that, we need a different way of incentivizing and measuring and rewarding performance. The current system absolutely rewards and incentivizes behaviors and performance, and it's dragging us over the edge of a cliff. The great late Oscar Wilde said that there was a real issue about people who understood the cost of everything and the value of nothing, and I fear that's precisely where we are. Thank you very much indeed.